Please welcome to the stage our developer panel. Brian Kanan is president of Orlando-based Kanan Associates, an urban planning, landscape architecture, and architectural design firm. For over 40 years, Brian has created sustainable communities through the practice of urban design and creative placemaking. Ernie Cox is the president of Family Lands Remembered, LLC, a company focused on the conservation and enhancement of significant land, water, and agricultural resources through creative planning, partnerships, and sustainable development. Timothy Sallin is co-CEO of IMG Enterprises, the holding company of Cherry Lake, Inc. IMG Enterprises is a second-generation, family-owned Florida agricultural company that manages over 13,000 acres throughout the state. The enterprise has diversified operations in citrus, environmental restoration, horticultural production, as well as landscape construction, irrigation, and maintenance. Matt Call is the project director for Starkey Ranch, where he leads the development team for the 2,500-acre community in Odessa being developed by Wheelock Communities. Starkey Ranch was honored in January as the top-selling master plan community in Tampa for the third year in a row.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Kanan. We have a great panel today. And this is the second outside developer collaborative that we're privileged to be part of. And one small housekeeping addition is Timothy Sallin, who's in for Tim Jackson. And Tim Jackson's an amazing practitioner, but he had an emergency, he couldn't make it. So let's start. We're going to be informal. One of the top questions we're trying to figure out is how we can shift the landscape paradigm in master plan communities. And you might want to ask, well, why would we focus on master plan communities? And I think it's worth a few minutes on that. There's a lot of reasons. Master plan communities have scale. They're big, they run for years. 10 years is not unusual. So there's an element of control there. They're high value. So there's some economic heft with master plan communities that enables a lot of things that couldn't happen on smaller projects. They're trendsetters, and that's what we're talking about, is changing a trend. They're also message well. So and you know, as part of that, they're attractive to early adopters. These are all things that I think are very interesting about the potential for working with master plan communities. The other thing is, there's a lot of them in Central Florida and actually throughout Florida. And this group is very skilled with all the issues involved in building those. So how can we shift the landscape paradigm in master plan communities? I thought it would be interesting to go back and look at what I call a conventional model. So this is a very nice community, and I walk this neighborhood with my wife a lot. And Marshall McLuhan one day said, the medium is the message. And I started thinking about that, because the medium is the landscape, and it sends a message. And in this particular case, you can speculate on that. If there were young kids in the house, they'd want to play on that lawn. So that's perfect for that. But it's also showcasing the person that owns that house and the family that inhabits that house. We're going to talk about habitation a little bit more. And so it showcases that house. And it's very personal. So this is formal. You notice the what I call the pesticide bird right in the front. And you all know what that means. On a more personal note, this is my yard. And actually at this event last year, that's St. Augustine grass that was getting mowed once a week. I decided I ought to think about, from a research project point of view, changing my landscape. And with that in mind, I was able to get my landscape architect, Greg Witherspoon, come up with a design. And Mark Gotts, excuse me, thank you so much, with Green Isle Gardens to install 30 different native species. And here you're looking at the the more horizontal services, the perennial peanut and the sunshine mimosa, which is probably about 8 months ago, and now it's fully grown in. So that was a fascinating learning experience for me and very productive. So I think we're also thinking about beauty, and we know that seeing is believing. Everything's visual, and we trained so well with our eyes. People spend billions of dollars on advertising, which is all visual primarily. So back to another model that I thought, in the same community, by the way, that's interesting. This one's more sculptural. It's very formal. There's some juniper trees, I think, that are getting trimmed very tightly. And it's sculpture, and there's St. Augustine grass, the pesticide birds in there somewhere, and box hedge in the front. And we said, let's imagine if we could transform that to native plants. And so we replaced those trees with holly trees. This is Photoshop. And introduced the frog fruit on the horizontal plane and some coreopsis for color and pollinators in the back. And asked ourselves, that qualifies, I think, as a new sense of beauty that has another dimension. So what are the benefits? Well, the benefits we all know about. There's going to be less pesticide use, less water used, less maintenance, less noise and pollution from the maintenance. The water that runs off will be cleaner. And there's, what I think is exciting is there's some hidden opportunities. What are those? Well, you're looking at one of them. So we start to introduce a more robust environmental system that has these flowering native plants and it attracts bees. That's a big bee. There's about 30 species of small bees that don't hive, and actually some of them nest in the ground. And they run around working with the pollinators, and it becomes very fascinating. And what finally dawned on me is if you walk through a neighborhood like I did in those earlier ones, and you don't see small plants and small flowering plants, and you don't see bees and you don't see butterflies, you may be looking at a pollinator desert, which is not good. And so the other last personal thing is, my wife and I joke, but we've found a new pet, actually. We come home every day and we walk out there and look at what's growing, what's not growing, what's flying today, and so forth. So it has this huge hidden dimension that I think is very important, because at the end of the day, this is all about learning and communicating and changing the way people look at the world. This was where I turn this over to you, Ernie.
Actually, I'd like to make a few comments before we get into your slides, Ernie. And I haven't had time to prepare any slides due to the last minute substitution. But I would like to just share what I'm most looking forward to out of this discussion with this panel and the rest of the day today and also tomorrow. And really it comes down to moving the needle on our shared purpose, which is to increase the adoption of sustainable landscaping practices in Florida. And in fact, there's been a lot of really great work that has been done this past year throughout the state. And I've seen many diverse teams and working on projects throughout the landscape transect. And also people thinking about the landscape holistically. So I think that we're seeing some momentum build. And in particular, there are, as you mentioned, Brian, a lot of large master plan communities in Florida and Central Florida that are underway now, either about to break ground or have already broken ground. And they are committed to exploring a new landscaping paradigm. I think that this is really one of our great opportunities. In part, I believe these developers are driven by the imperative to save water and also to reduce chemical and nutrient pollution. But at the same time, there is a rising consumer and market trend that's driving this cultural shift towards sustainability. So it's really the perfect storm where we have resource constraints, we have regulatory pressure, and perhaps most importantly, we have this cultural awakening or zeitgeist that's driving an adoption towards sustainable practices. So we've come a long ways in the past year since we last convened this Collab. And as we're seeing an increase in the demand and interest in sustainable landscaping practices, I feel that there is a heightened sense of urgency for us to continue to develop proven solutions to deliver sustainable landscaping in a manner that is both aesthetically pleasing and also financially viable, so that we can deploy these solutions to people like Ernie and people like Matt and others who are ready to take that first step. And these master plan communities are kind of a tremendous opportunity, as you were telling us, because they are trendsetters and they are thinking long term. And as they're thinking long term, they are more likely to see those trends and to take the first step. So if we can demonstrate success, and by success, I mean aesthetically, financially, socially, and ecologically. So when we talk about a sustainable landscape, we can't just narrow our focus on ecological sustainability. Obviously, that's really what we're after, but it's not going to be sustainable if it's not financially sustainable, if it's not socially and culturally accepted.
Yeah.
And of course, a big part of that is making it beautiful. And there isn't a choice between a beautiful landscape and a sustainable landscape. That's a false idea. We definitely expect both, and I know that we can have both. So this is really what the Outside Collab is all about. It's about working together across the varied stakeholders that are represented here and trying to move the needle on increasing the adoption of sustainable landscaping practices. We've defined 10 strategic goals that are, in a sense, a roadmap for how we can move in that direction. And I invite you to go on our website, outsidecollab.com, to review those goals. You can also see them in the Whova app. And across those goals, we do talk about other things than master plan communities, such as working with government and codes and nurseries, increasing the supply of plant material. But for today's talk, I'm really excited about seeing how far we can get into this topic of working with somebody like Ernie, who has 68,000 acres of land to develop, and influencing you to do this in a successful way. Because if you do it, I think it's going to lead other people to do it. So really excited about this talk and hearing from you.
You're on.
So I'm on. Okay, well, it's great to be here. It was a lot of fun last year, and very much enjoy trying to push the envelope and being part of this panel. Great topic, very timely. This is a little project. Went the wrong way.
Other way.
Had to push the right button. So Deering Park, it's a brand new community. We've not started yet. Our expectation is that we'll begin about mid-2022, but the planning is done, and just recently the plan we're going to show you has been approved by the City of Edgewater a week ago Monday. So first, a little bit of context and a little personal story for everybody is the outline in white that you're seeing on the screen is approximately 68,000 acres. It's located between New Smyrna Beach and Titusville. So pretty much if you make that drive down I-95 coming south from Daytona, New Smyrna Beach, there's a vacant right-hand side of I-95 that goes for about 20 miles. Well, this project takes up about 15 of that. And what you're seeing on the screen is kind of the overlay of my own hometown of Jupiter. Let me see what the next one shows. Nope. Hometown of Jupiter all the way down to Lake Worth. So if anybody's from South Florida, you understand that context. And there's about 1.5 million people that call Palm Beach County home. But overlaid in green are the 50,000 acres of permanent conservation and agriculture that's part of Deering Park. And so you can see the overlay. What would have happened if 50 years ago we had put in permanent conservation 50,000 acres of the 68,000 acres between Jupiter and Lake Worth? Something that's new, and it relates to the Outside Collab in a little bit different perspective. Indian River Lagoon protection. As we all know, it's an estuary of natural significance. It is also impaired for nutrients, has too much phosphorus and too much nitrogen. One of the contributing causes is a permitted discharge of reclaimed water. Reclaimed water is great for irrigation. It's great to irrigate without using potable water. It can be beneficially reused, but it also contains phosphorus and nitrogen. And if that phosphorus and nitrogen is added to a water body like the Lake Worth or the Indian River Lagoon, which already has too many nutrients, not a good idea. So as part of this project, we're partnering with the city of Edgewater to do a wetland park. And we'll actually create about 40 acres of man-made wetlands in a current upland area, distant from the river. And that reclaimed water, when there's excess, will go into the wetland to feed the native plants that we're going to plant. So it's both aesthetic, but it's also habitat, and it's taking that water and beneficially reusing it, keeping it out of the river. A little bit about the town square of Deering Park. This will be the first phase. And so when I talk about the 50,000 acres of conservation, there'll be about 18,000 acres that'll be developed over the next 50 to 60 years. So very, very long-term perspective, multi-generational development, but centered on a traditional town square. How do you get people out? How do you create business opportunities, welcome opportunities, recreational opportunities, community opportunities? And so just like small towns throughout the world, we're starting with a small square and then making it very easy to walk and bike and visit. I'll point out something. This is actually a picture that I took from my own front yard on the street that I live in Jupiter. I live in a master plan community called Abacoa, neo-traditional, mostly alleys in the back and porches on the front. And I love my street because it's got live oaks with a beautiful oak canopy that you can see here, the left-hand side. What I don't like is that if you look at the picture in the middle, that live oak does not have enough room to grow. I actually got into a little bit of a dispute with my HOA. The homeowners association was going to come in and take that live oak out because it was starting to crack the sidewalk. And I explained to them that they could come in and they could root prune it and they could rebuild the sidewalk and that the oak tree wasn't going anywhere. Now, in the right-hand picture, I was successful there. In the right-hand picture, that oak tree's actually got room to grow. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with Deering Park is to make sure that we provide enough room for the plants that we're going to plant. So if you decide that an oak is your street tree, you have to give that oak plenty of room. And so we're anticipating at least 10 feet between edge of street and sidewalk for an oak tree. If we don't have 10 feet, well, we're not putting a live oak there. Very, very important to put the right tree in the right place. And then the other thing that I was intrigued with your yard, as many of you know, my mother is a PhD ecologist, Ann Cox, and she has a completely native yard. I'm in the process of changing a little bit, but one of the things we're going to do in Deering Park is instead of using grass everywhere, we're going to use native ground cover and try to use some flowering plants. And the sunshine mimosa, which you put in, is a favorite with the little pink flowers. This goes back to Brian, so really excited about the panel.
I think it does. Let's see what we get up to here. I've got to go back, I think, the other way. Well, this is sort of the way I was going to end it. So let's.
They're a little out of order.
Yeah. Strange, but let's start with this picture. The Sustainee is the project we're talking about, and I've done a lot of master plan communities over the years, and this is the first one that's had anything like this, and so we're very excited about this in our office. If you can focus on that, which is sort of difficult to see, it wasn't quite that way when I set it up, but we're interested in doing an intentional master plan community. And why do I say intentional? We're intentional about the human habitat and equally intentional about the wildlife habitat. And if you think about the human side, we're creating a walkable, bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, slow-speed, highly connected network of two-lane streets. They're all two-lane. They're all multimodal because we see a huge opportunity for e-bikes And in fact, we have a program where we'll be able to have our residents e-bike over to the University of Florida. We're located just east of the university, and we're just east of a 700-acre preserve that has the econ running right through the middle of it. So there's a natural impetus to make a very strong nature connection in this community. And we think that's very much a part of the well-being of our residents. So our ethos at Sustainee is promoting well-being for our residents in different ways, but intentionally connecting them with nature. And then on the habitat side, the other images up there, we're very intentional about that because we've got target species, and we're going to match those to different parts of the plan to create special habitat. So if you see a flying squirrel, think canopy trees. When you see the otters, think water edge. And there's, hundreds of acres of water and lots and lots and lots of canopy when you put all those miles and miles of street together. And when you see shrubs, think of bees. And I talked about the 30 bees and the pollinating and so forth. So the overall intention is combining these into one holistic approach to where you can live in this community, be integrated to the natural environment, and excited about it. And it's the other thing I should mention, this is the plan. The other thing I should mention is it's very much a learning and education-based community. So one of the innovative things we're going to do is set up a foundation. The foundation is going to be funded indefinitely, past build-out, and the foundation is going to take title to 100 acres of prime land in the middle of the community that has the big lake and there's wetlands and the upland preserve, which is about 20 acres. And that'll be a research project going forward indefinitely. And in the first phase, our client, a developer who's very imaginative, is going to fund a learning building, a learning education building that will be open to the public. We'll mix the residents that we have on site with visiting public, be it the Native Plant Society, the Audubon Society, the various other community activists that we would like to get involved in our project. And we also are teamed up with the University of Florida PREC program, which is the Project for Resource Efficiencies of Dr. Jones. So that's a benchmark monitoring and managing program indefinitely. I think you are on that page as well, Ernie. And we connected, as I said, by bike to the university. So it's a very walkable community. And this slide, if you can read it, just showcases the first phase and the initiative that shows that building on the far left. That's the learning center and some surrounding buildings, and there's a native plant courtyard that'll continue to be evolving. There's a 1-mile canoe trip around the lake that's a nature guided trip looking at all the wetlands we can influence. And there's a sustainable environmental area called a SEEP that's also part of our research. And then there's going to be 5 model homes that have native plantings in their front yards and backyards, day 1. So this is very much about the education that drives this change that we're anticipating. And I think we now are able to turn this over to Starkey Ranch.
Great. Thanks so much for having me here today. My name is Matt Call, and here to talk about Starkey Ranch. What's different about Starkey Ranch is that it's a community who's been going for 8 years now, and really over the last 6 years, we've been implementing this natural landscape and selling homes. And we've actually been doing very well in that we've been the top selling master plan in the Tampa Bay area over the last 3 years. And really the theme that we started with here was a connection to nature. And that's the theme that really connects with our buyers. We find that the buyers, they do want to have this connection to nature. So while we've been very successful in a lot of our common areas in implementing this whole natural theme and a lot of native landscaping, the challenge that's still out there and that I'm looking forward to discussing with these other gentlemen today is just the challenge of, okay, when we get to the individual yards, how do we then promote more native landscaping in the yards, and how do we shift the mindset of a lot of consumers? One of the top comments I get from some of our customers is, hey, I want this luscious green look. I want these palm trees. And some of them are moving in from out of state. And so that's just their image of Florida. That's what they think Florida is. And that's not what Florida was. Florida was this very native, oak hammock, palms, palmetto type of landscape. So this picture I just wanted to throw up real quick is actually a stand of irrigated bahia grass. It's in a median, and it doesn't look horrible. You get up close on it, you can actually see the weed growth, and I think most of the viewers can probably see the weed growth in it. And going with bahia, which takes a little bit less fertilizer and pesticides and things like that, and in theory a little bit less water, it really hasn't worked out too well for us in that then we put down fertilizer and we end up with the brown streak that doesn't look too exciting for anyone. So one of the things that we did do in Starkey Ranch is we planted a lot of zoysia grass. It still has its challenges, but it worked out quite well for us in that we're able to maintain that emerald green look that most consumers want to see while still using less water and a little bit less pesticide. And I was talking to Brian about this a little bit before. Our presentation today is just, the challenges that we have are really, it comes down to the maintenance in, hiring the right skilled labor that understands how to maintain either bahia grass or zoysia grass or floratam or any other variety of native planting that we do. We even have a lot of peanut grass in Starkey Ranch, and our team has really done an excellent job of learning a good method that can be implemented to maintain it. But I think what's now important is that we are able to share that knowledge from what we've learned out to the industry, so that as other people plant peanut, they're able to do it successfully and then maintain it well. So last picture real quick was just more nice luscious green landscaping. That it's interesting because it has that native look, but yet it meets what the consumers are looking for as far as a level of greenness.
Okay, so we're going to move into a real freewheeling, open exchange of ideas and test ourselves, see what we come up with. So I thought it'd be helpful to start that with what I call dissecting the challenge. And there's an economic marketing aspect that Timothy touched on that's powerful in this thing. And so I try to diagram that simply here, which is, it starts with the consumer, the buyer. They've got to want to do this. And why? Because the builder has to satisfy them. And why the builder? Because the developer has to have the builder on board. And ultimately, all of those have to rely on Timothy and others to have available materials. And then finally, to your point, Matt, it's got to be, I call it the maintainers, it's got to be maintained. So that's, I think, something that we can't overlook is this, what I call the economic food chain, of how this stuff works. And then what I thought I'd leave on the screen for us is, I didn't count these up, but I think there's about 20 different moving parts to the discussion. And they come and go in terms of importance at different stages in the project, but it's the environment, time, sustainability, supply, a food web, maintenance cost, as Matt said. The look of it is everything. So with that, let's just open this up, and Tim, you want to give us your idea from you're at the beginning and the end. You start with growing it, but then you end up putting it in the ground and.
Yeah, we install it, we maintain it, and we grow it. And I think we have integrated at Cherry Lake the services that we provide. Each step of the way was so that we could maintain more control over the process, because we notice so often that when you transition or hand off a landscape to another company, you're at the mercy of that company to continue the correct practices so that what you started can be sustainable. And that's not always the case because of maybe some flaws in our bidding system and our contracts, and it's hard to ensure integrity across the life of the landscape. So yes, we do a lot of these things, but as you say, it starts with getting the consumer to actually want this, and I feel like that's where we have to find a way to prime the pump, so to speak, and to get enough out there for the consumer to see what it looks like.
And then, that's what we've focused on with this project I described, because we figure seeing is believing, and education enhances that. So we've put it in the ground up front so people can see it and get attached to it, hopefully, and start the learning process. And that's why we've got this connection with these scientists from both universities and the programs from Native Plant Society who will be hosted on site in our building. What do you think you're going to do on your side?
The comment that was made earlier about what do people expect when they come to Florida? Green grass and palm trees, because that's what people believe. It's kind of like the folks that don't really know there's a Florida between I-95 and I-75. There's a whole lot of stuff in there that's not just Orlando and Disney World. Yeah. And so a lot of it, I think, is setting that tone. I think you guys have done a great job at Starkey Ranch with the community feel that connects with nature. And Florida, I've grown up in Florida, so I think it's absolutely beautiful. Get me out onto a ranch or out into the wilderness in Florida, and that's just a great place. You can build that into the community. One that's recent that I drove through that I'm very impressed with is the Hamlin neighborhood within the Horizons West. Used to be orange groves, then it was timber. I think they've done a real nice job of using native plants in appropriate ways. And some of the ground cover and the grasses, like this time of year, muley grass is in bloom. It's absolutely beautiful. Relatively easy to maintain. But you've got to put it in the right place. So I think first of all, at a master plan community perspective, we all have an opportunity to set the tone. And then with our builders, particularly if we can work out some programs with Tim and other suppliers, say, folks, let's go ahead and showcase these natives and low maintenance and lack of need for fertilizer and watering in our model homes. And then provide that as the landscape palette that comes with the home, and then educate the community that this is why we've done what we've done. I think it's got to be holistic.
Yeah, and I really agree with what you said there, because that's always a challenge where, we set a landscape palette in Starkey Ranch and we said, okay, here's all the approved natural species that you're allowed to plant. And then the builders come to us and they do this model program and they're like, but we want a bird of paradise in the front yard. And I love a bird of paradise, but it wasn't on the list of plants that we wanted to designate for the community. And so then you start having this discussion with the builders of, well, what's really appropriate to showcase in your model home. And I really do think that if we can make progress with the builders and start to showcase more and more of that natural landscaping, it will give us some progress. And I think the other thing, I was thinking about this on the way over, was that I always called it the Lowe's challenge, in that most consumers go to Lowe's and the Hawaiian Thai plant is right there, the Croton plant's right there at the entranceway, and it's on sale, and it's that time of year, and then all of a sudden all these plants that are not on our approved list start showing up. And as developer, I sit on the HOA side as well, and then we start sending them letters. Oh, of course, yeah. And hey, sir, ma'am, your Hawaiian Thai plant has to go. Now, what we allow them to do is have it in a pot if they really would like to have something like that.
That's very powerful that you do that.
But it's a challenge because.
You gonna push back on that?
Of course. But most people get it. It takes a little bit of discussion. But most people get it. But the challenge is that's put in front of the consumer. My wife has come home with Hawaiian Thai plants. All right, like it happens.
So Lowe's must be okay.
It must be fine, right? And they're great in some settings. But when you're trying to establish this native Florida palette, I went and put beautyberry in my front yard. And I'm the only one in my neighborhood with beautyberry, but this time of year, is it beautiful? And does everyone come by and look at it and say, oh, it looks so great? Of course, but we're in this discussion of how do we change that mindset of consumers. Unfortunately, you're not going to go to Lowe's and buy beautyberry because it's just not readily available.
I have a question, Matt. So let's assume you're dealing with a builder, and let's assume he's going to or she's going to have 5 models, 3 models, whatever. What do you think the chances are of success if you said one of your front yards is going to be native landscaped and very well done, and the others you can do whatever you want as long as you're using our plants, so, which means it might end up with St. Augustine grass or something. I don't know. What do you think about that? Because I don't think you can force everybody to do one thing.
Correct. And I have to go back to my time in working for a builder. And that was a brief amount of time in the beginning of my career. But it comes down to money. And the builders all allocate, I think you guys talked about this last year, they allocate a certain amount of money to have a landscape package that looks a certain way when that model's done. And it's just this expectation of it's going to have a palm tree, it's going to have a magnolia, it's going to have a holly bush or two. And there's just these certain things that they just go to over and over again. But a lot of it is on the supply side. You know, if we could get Tim and his group more involved in helping these builders come up with designs and then providing the plants and then, you know, even maintaining it, right, so that it looks fantastic. And then that's what it's going to take is a great model home that we can showcase. It's going to take great images because as a society we're becoming so, you know, Instagrammable, right? It's all about the images and it's all about what we put out there. But I think, you know, this is great. What we're doing is talking about, you know, great solutions, but we need to start, you know, sharing ideas and implementing because without all of us together, working together, we're not going to make progress.
So one other question to follow up, and then I'd like you guys to jump on this as well. The master developer does actually control a lot of dirt and a lot of common area. And so that is fully within your control. And I see the challenges, so I think we should come back to the challenges. But what do you think of the idea of, if you were starting from scratch, because you guys started a long time ago, like we're about to start a project, or Ernie is, that the developer-controlled property is done with natives, and there's no question about that. And then there's a little bit of flexing with the builders, but at least the builders and the community buyers and so forth can be educated by the fact that it's there and they can see it. And then I guess the real question is, do you think you could actually manage the maintenance side?
Yeah, and we've done a good job with that at Starkey Ranch in that there are a lot of native plantings out there. You can't have, you know, beautyberry and coontie palm and, you know, natives all up and down your medians. You have to have patches of grass because I think the consumer expects that, and you want to have that variation, right? You don't want to make it feel like you're in the woods all the time. It doesn't work in many places, but in maybe Tampa and Orlando and other parts of the state, there's a certain level of expectation that you're going to have some emerald green grass somewhere.
With the parks, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
And then, you know, once again, you have the challenges of, you know, what type of sod are you going to put down, because then the people are going to play on it and it's going to get, you know, a lot of use and it's going to wear out and you have replacement. So there's a lot of thought that has to be done in that. But I think Starkey Ranch is a good showcase of, hey, we did go native and we really tried to stay true to that. And, you know, just thinking about the progression, you mentioned Hamlin. Hamlin was before Starkey Ranch, but it's same design team, right? Same design firm. And we were able to take things from Hamlin to implement in the Starkey Ranch. And then now we see people taking things from Starkey Ranch and trying to implement it in other places. So I think it's just a continuous build.
So Tim, we talked about the supply side and that the materials have to be there or else nothing happens. But what about on the maintenance side? Do you see that as a viable business for people to get into maintaining this different type of landscape?
Absolutely. I think that it is coming. You know, we have been building, you know, and iterating from Hamlin to Starkey Ranch, and now we have projects from the ground up like Sustainee and Deering Park who are, you know, planning from the beginning to do this in a holistic fashion. So there's a market that's there. We haven't even spoken about Sunbridge, which will be represented on the next panel. Right. But there really is a market that's emerging, and it is a completely different skill set. It's a different for maintenance. It's a different asset base, different types of equipment, different model of deployments, training. You know, it requires more plant knowledge, being able to identify a large number of native and Florida-friendly plants, being able to know what the life cycle of these plants is, and when is the appropriate time to prune the plants, to deadhead the plants in order to promote flowering, to promote the optimal aesthetic appearance of that plant, understanding variations in soil moisture. So for example, if you have frog fruit as a ground cover and you have mimosa as a ground cover, they're both excellent ground covers. But frog fruit will actually like a lot of water. It can deal with drought, but it thrives with water, whereas mimosa, it does not handle water at all. And a lot of times you'll see mimosa declining. It's not mimosa, the problem is the water that you're putting on it. So these nuances have to be understood, and at the design stage, of course, it's important those things are understood, but at the maintenance side, so we have the need now to develop an entirely new set of skills and new, it's a new form of maintenance. And to me, that's a massive market opportunity.
Is it more labor intensive or less?
I've gotten some feedback from people who have maybe a little bit more experience than me in monitoring that particular issue, and it's about the same. You're replacing labor that is mowing, blowing, and edging with two-cycle equipment, which is carbon intensive and a lot of noise. You're replacing that labor with hand pruning and weeding and dealing with just managing the invasives and pruning the plants. So it's maybe about the same amount of labor, but it's a completely different set of tasks. And for that, you need to build a different type of maintenance organization.
Yeah.
So we need to cluster density where you have enough of these landscapes in one place so that you can justify building a team of maintenance professionals who are going to be dedicated to that area. Because in maintenance, mobilization and drive time is an important part of the cost. So we need that density, which is, again, why these master plan communities are so promising. Because you could see that density occurring there, and then Cherry Lake could build a team and position it in Sustainee or in Deering Park or in Sunbridge, Cherry Lake or others who want to take advantage of this growing market.
I pick up on that, and I think, again, each of these large master plan communities gives you enough scale to actually have an education program for your maintenance team. And so it may be, I'll give you a prime example. You'd mentioned the University of Florida's program for resource efficient communities. Also engage with your local extension office. Yeah. So the University of Florida, through Ag Extension, Sarasota County does a great job with their Ag Extension. They're doing a lot of education. And so utilizing resources in the community that you might not think about for a master plan community that are designed to help grow and maintain different plant species. So one is the extension office in each of our 67 counties through the University of Florida in conjunction with the county. And then the second is to actually develop training programs for the landscapers that may be involved in the community. I'll give you another example. Babcock Ranch, if you've been out there recently, commitment to doing natives in all the common areas. It's really beautiful, but it takes a different type of maintenance.
I think, are they doing it in-house?
I really don't know how they're maintaining it. And I just drove through and thought, okay, I know what was planned and I know what I'm seeing, and it's a very different feel. And what's also beginning to happen is that the community is beginning to engage. I saw something short on this, but they have a community Facebook page. And there was somebody on there last night saying, I really like this, what is it, and how can I get it in my front yard? Mm-hmm. And somebody else jumps on and says, well, no, that's perennial peanut, and yes, you can, and here's where you need to go. And the next thing you know, you've got this community discussion, totally independent of the developer, totally independent of the landscape folks, just community members educating each other and saying, I want that, I like this. So that, don't underestimate the value of this social media engagement in driving this conversation.
And you know what we need to do is monitor the resales. And if we see there's a premium associated with this, that's another motivator for the builders and ultimately consumers. So we need to do that research.
I wanted to ask Tim, how do you get into Lowe's and Home Depot?
Yeah, we're thinking about the addressing the supply challenges. There's lots of challenges as we've identified, but to me the good news is that there's a lot of momentum, and I think that we are accelerating the pace of progress on this issue, and the ability to tell a compelling story that inspires people to think about their landscape in a new way.
Yeah.
Like you have now, as you're discovering all of these amazing hidden benefits, and I have the same story.
You're doing the same
yeah,
thing.
I'm doing the same. And having Doug here to share, his story is so powerful because it's an example of a great storytelling that is compelling and inspiring and helps people make that vital connection. That our landscapes are more than something just to look at.
Yeah, I think we're running to the end, but I had a conversation with Pierce Jones, and I said, the weakness is consumer acceptance. And then he edited my paper that I shared with you guys, and he said that what's really, because I said the regulators aren't going to have much influence on the way we design for consumers. He said, oh no, he said the pressure's coming that you can't use water anymore, and that's going to make it much easier to do. So that's a big unknown in this whole equation, is how tight that's going to get, and it has become very tight in some of our communities, some parts of the state.
Picking up on that though, it's interesting is you have both the you can't use water and you must take water. And so the comment of using a plant species that is okay with being very wet would be an opportunity to take this excess reclaim water. Right. And so I think we're going to have to become more creative in the holistic design, from medians to landscaping to stormwater to lakes to nutrients, and what are we planting, and how is what we're planting taking up nutrients, and then what goes in the wet areas, what goes in the dry areas, and do you design for wet and dry? I always laugh. My mom says constantly, you've got to put the right plant in the right place. And many times you'll go into a new development or even old development, and you'll find that the wetland plants are up on the hill and the upland plants are down by the wetlands, and neither plant is happy. It's in the wrong place.
Yep. And just to piggyback off of what Tim was talking about, with these master plans, so for instance in Starkey Ranch, 2,500 acres, we have 2 detail crews, and detail crew means the crew that goes around does nothing but maintain the natural areas. They're not on mowers, they're not on weed eaters. It's a lot of pruning, a lot of hand cutting, and all that kind of stuff. And what we find is that's a completely different skill set with the labor force than the crews that are the mow crews. Yeah. It's it just takes a whole different eye and a whole different just natural ability. Yeah. But kind of to your point, as we implement these natural landscapes into these master plans, with 1,000 acres or 800 acres, you can have a detail crew. And then it's important that we start working with the local USF offices and the University of Florida, and implementing best practices into these communities. And I really do think the consumer will connect with it. I'm very optimistic about the future.
Well, back to the consumer, and I was a part of a panel on Monday with the New Smyrna Beach Board of Realtors, and one of the speakers was talking about the expectations of the millennials, who are now the largest home buying coming into their zone. I have a few millennials that my wife and I have produced, and they're in that beginning to buy homes, 2 own homes, 2 don't. But what are their interests? And they have very different interests than we do. And so that particular generation, then if you go to the next one following, generation, I guess they call it Z, a much more sustainable mindset. You walk around a college campus and everybody's got their own water bottle. They carry that with them wherever they go. They look at you askance if you have a plastic water bottle. So I think there's an opportunity with the millennials and the Gen Z to bring this ethic into the community, and they'll demand this type of sustainability.
Yeah, no, I agree. I see that in the younger generations, that there is this building demand for recycling and taking care of the planet and driving electric cars and all those things. So I think it's just a natural progression of where we are today and continuing to advance it, because it is kind of the older generation, right, who's thinking about the green grass and palm trees.
So, yeah.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up. This was a fantastic discussion. I want to thank all of you. And it's going to be even better next year, Tim.
Every year, we're going to have more to report. So.
Yes. Yes. It's been great.
No, I think there's, we've had this conversation. I talked to a lot of mention of Pierce Jones. Pierce is actually today at the Marine Resources Council Low Impact Development Conference that's being done over two days. Again, same concept. How do we minimize nutrients that are going into water bodies? Well, one of the ways we do that is by putting less fertilizer on the landscape. I also find interesting that our agencies are starting to better understand it. And so if you look at the Department of Transportation, they're starting to use some wildflowers in part of their maintenance. Other states go far beyond that. Again, from the same perspective, easy to maintain, more sustainable, yet attractive.
Yep. And I think, one of the things we didn't really get to touch on today, but the idea of, does the consumer really understand the amount of nutrients that are being used? And I think most are oblivious to it. So that's the next step in education, I think.
And what does it cost them?
Yes, and what does it cost us to continue to do this?
Save? Yeah.
Yes.
Big dollars.
And then finally, I know we've only got a few more minutes, but Tim, as you think about expanding the native plant nursery world and the maintenance, is there an opportunity, if Lowe's and Home Depot don't pick up on all of those, is there a way to bring them into the community?
We're thinking about it, and we'll report back in future outside events.
Great.
So lots more work to do.
Thank you, everybody. This was really great.
Yes, thank you guys.